Hospice means is that you start doing palliative care instead of curative care. Okay? And there's 20% of hospice patients who live 2 or more years. My favorite story in this area is this happened about 5 years ago. Fella went into hospice care. He was married at the time. He got such good care from the hospice nurse. He divorced his wife, married a hospice nurse, lived for another 5 years. Okay? Wonderful nurse. Okay? And so hospice does not mean immediate death. And it doesn't mean that you can't have procedures. We had this one fella who, you know, there's a bacteria in the hospital called MSR. And he had what's for the heart? Bypass? Not the bypass. Pacemaker. Pacemaker. Thank you. He had a pacemaker in, and it got that bacteria, MRSA or whatever, and it wouldn't clear up. And so every single time what happened is that he would get like an infection. And he would, you know, get high temperature, start breaking out, very uncomfortable. He was in Kaiser Hospital at the time. Well, there's very few prescription drugs that will fight that bacteria. And the bacteria, the drug was $500 a pill. And he also had Parkinson's disease, he also had some dementia, and he also had not a great heart. And so the question became, is taking that pill curative or palliative? What would you argue?
I'd argue it's palliative.
Of course, that's what we argue. But the nurse on the nurse at the station said that was curative. And so one day later, we got that all changed around. He lived a good 6 months later, and he died very peacefully and comfortably. But you could see, you know, that curative and palliative argument is always there. I've had individuals who had cancer, prostate cancer, and prostate cancer is very, very painful, especially when it metastasizes. Does that mean it goes through the rest of the body? Yeah. And it went all metastasized. And so it got to his shoulders, and his shoulders were very painful. And so we had radiation therapy done, even though his entire body was full with cancer, because it made him more comfortable. So you can have procedures, but people who are not familiar with this, you know, they think hospice, oh my gosh, you know, mom and dad are going to die. We're not going to do that. But in our family, it was, if my dad goes into hospice, we're giving up. We're not giving up. And so I just, you know, I get a little emotional about this, but you got to have it what you want. Okay? And it's got to be in writing. And it's got to be told to the agent who's going to be making these decisions for you. How many of you have spent more than 10 minutes talking to your agent about your advanced health care directive? Nobody. Come on. Okay? It's worth more than 10 minutes. Okay? It's worth a bottle of wine. It's worth at least an hour. Pulling the plug. Say, I want you to pull the plug. I don't know what that means. Okay? I've had a doctor, you know, the description in the advanced healthcare that says if I no longer can
live without artificial respiration or other means, if I'm in a persistent vegetative state, or irreversible coma with no reasonable certainty that I'll survive.
I want you to pull the plug. I get a call about 7 o'clock in the morning. One of my clients, at 3 o'clock in the morning in Los Alamitos Hospital, had a stroke. Visited her at the hospital. She's on a, she's intubated. She has the tube down her throat and basically living off the oxygen machine. She had never told me, one, that she had named me as her advanced healthcare person. Okay? So never had a chat with her. So I'm looking at the advanced healthcare directive in the emergency room, trying to figure exactly what he just read out. So I checked with the doctor, and it says, well, it seems to me you got her on a machine, and it says here that she didn't want any extraordinary means to keep her alive, and he says, well, that's not what I read.
Really?
Yeah. He says, we're not doing anything extraordinary here.
Shit.
Money.
No, I don't know. And I said, so we had a conversation and said, okay, what do you think her prognosis is? He said, we really don't know. Why don't we wait 24 hours and then let's make another assessment. Another 24 hours went by and said, what do you think, Doc? She still hasn't come around. How are her vitals? And he said, I'm not sure yet. And I said, okay, but what do we need to do to make sure? And he says, what I'd like to do is bring in a heart specialist, a cardiologist, have him examine her, and then we'll make up our minds after that. And I said, okay, and how many days are we going to take? He says, I'll do it till Wednesday. This was Monday. Wednesday came around, hadn't received a call from him, gave him a call and said, what is the cardiologist's opinion? And he said he thinks that she does not, he has about a 50-50 chance of survival. What would you like to do? And I says, I would like to get her off that machine. That's what I read in her advanced healthcare directive. And he says, we'll do it at 6 o'clock tonight. She was dead in 20 minutes. Okay? But this is the stuff that you go through. And so if you're named an agent, you know, what is their temperament? Do they know what you want? Can they communicate with doctors? Are they a bully in a china shop? Do you think anybody's going to listen to them? Are they a wallflower? Do they know what drugs you take? Everybody has a different tolerance to drugs. My dad could take 3 Vicodin and still talk normally. My mother take a half a tablet of Vicodin and she was in La La Land. You know? And so when you're under, I mean, I've seen people on beds do 360s because the nurse hadn't given the person enough drugs. Some of us, and when we're dealing with morphine and narcotics, the hospital and the nursing homes, they have to keep their eye on those kinds of drugs. So it's, you know, it's not given as freely as some of the others. So do we really want to name an agent who lives in New York or Nevada? I had a guy who was named agent and he lived in Redlands and an uncle lived in Laguna Hills. Do you think that's too far? It is. On a Friday, it takes 3 hours to get from Redlands over to Laguna Hills. And not only that, he thought he could do it by phone. Yeah, call in. You know, I went to visit him and he had a catheter and it was buried in his skin. Nobody had looked at him. Okay? So you can't do this stuff from a distance. You got to be there for the individual. The individual has to have time. And he has to have an understanding. He or she has to have an understanding of what you want. And if they can say to the doctor, yes, I've spent an hour, hour and a half, they don't have to mention the bottle of wine, talking to my parents, and this is what she wanted, or this is what he wanted. And that has such power with the medical doctor. The medical doctor wants to be of best help to you. But if there is dissension within the family, what are they going to do?
They're not going to do anything.
Exactly. I mean, I have 3 sisters and they're wonderful people, but we had dissension. My dad was in the intensive care unit for over 2 months. And all of us wanted different things, and we didn't have any of these legal documents. And they were stymied. They wouldn't do anything to relieve him. And so it was just awful. And I don't want to have that happen to you. You're in charge. You get to name the person, and you get to tell them what you want. And you only get a chance to do it once. According to National Public Radio, I know that's a liberal station, but, you know, they said that there's only 2 medical schools that have more than 1 semester for doctors on dying. You know, think of a mechanic. When you tell a mechanic, what kind of mechanic are you? You can't fix my engine? What does the mechanic feel like? He failed. Well, doctors feel the same way if they can't fix you a lot of times. They fail. And so a lot of times they go too long to try to fix you if you don't want to be fixed. If you understand how painful cancer treatment is, and you don't want to go through that, that's a legitimate choice you can make. But some people want to go through the entire cancer treatment. That doesn't matter. But what if your son or daughter is a Jehovah's Witness? What happens then? They don't believe in transfusions, right? Have you lived with your son or daughter the last 30 years and asked them what their values are? I've had 2 sisters who were both Catholic, and I had to bring the priest in because if the person were allowed to die, the sister thought that she would be committing a mortal sin. That she had to do everything possible to save her sister. Her sister had cancer 3 times. She was like 72 pounds and 5'4". I mean, the poor thing, you know, was like a begging her, please let her die. You know? And so, but it's your choice. It's not, you want to name an agent who can carry out your wishes, not theirs. I mean, I had a 93-year-old guy who was an advanced health care. We brought him into Saddleback. First thing the doctor tells me is, gosh, he's lived a long life, hasn't he? What was the message?
It's over.
It's over.
A good 93 years.
Yeah. And Chris wore a suit every day, wore a hairpiece, shoes. He was a ballet dancer during his youth. I mean, you know, and he told me, he says, I want you to do everything to keep me alive. And so I said, hey, have you done an MRI yet? No, I haven't. Well, we didn't order one. Well, could you please order one? You know? And so the guy was about 40 years old, and he looks at a 93-year-old and he says, hey, you're practically gone. You know? Wrong. You know, so, I mean, you just don't know. And so, you know, you need somebody who's your advocate, somebody who understands you, somebody who knows what you want, and I swear, it requires more than a 10-minute conversation.